My aunt left me a voicemail the night before she died. I didn't listen to it for 6 months. I couldn't. The phone sat on my nightstand, and I knew the message was in there. Her voice, her words, whatever she'd wanted to say in those last hours. When she was alone in that hospital room in Tucson, and I was 3 states away finishing a glaze batch that I refused to leave unattended. That's the thing about ceramics. The fire doesn't wait for you to be emotionally ready. My name is Nora Weston. I'm 31 years old. I make pottery. Not the kind you find in tourist shops with painted cacti and Arizona stamped on the bottom. The kind it takes 4 years to get right, that cracks 8 times before it holds, that a food critic in Portland once described as having the quiet confidence of something that has survived. I didn't know what to do with that sentence when I first read it. Now I keep it taped to the inside of my kiln room door. My father built bridges, not metaphorically. Structural engineering, load-bearing calculations, contracts with municipalities across the Southwest. He's methodical and precise and genuinely one of the most intelligent people I have ever known. He also believed, with total sincerity and zero malice, that art was something you appreciated in museums, not something you built a life around. My older brother, Ryan, followed him in. Civil engineering at Arizona State, recruited straight into my father's firm at 23. My father talks about Ryan the way other men talk about their best investments. Steady returns, no surprises. Ryan is good at what he does and he genuinely loves it, which makes everything easier to understand and harder to resent. I was the variable in the equation. I took an elective ceramics class my sophomore year of high school because it fit my schedule and my counselor said I needed an art credit. I walked into that room, sat down at the wheel, centered my first lump of clay, and felt something click into place in my chest that I had been waiting my entire life to feel without knowing I was waiting. My teacher was a woman named Mrs. Kowalski, who had studied under a Japanese ceramicist in Kyoto for 2 years and came back to Tempe to teach 15-year-olds how to wedge air bubbles out of clay. She let me stay after class. She let me come in on Saturdays. She told me once, while we were loading a bisque firing together, that I had the hands for it. I didn't know what that meant then. I think I understand now. It means you approach the material like a conversation instead of a confrontation. I spent every weekend of high school in that ceramics room. I filled sketchbooks with glaze recipes and firing schedules. I watched every video I could find of Japanese and Korean and American studio potters working. I started saving birthday money to buy my own tools. My father thought it was a phase, a healthy creative outlet, the kind of thing that would look good on a college application and then quietly dissolve when real life started. It did not dissolve. The confrontation happened the summer before my senior year. I had applied, without telling anyone, to the Ceramics and Studio Arts program at the Kansas City Art Institute. I'd submitted a portfolio of 20 pieces that I'd been building for 8 months, documented with photographs I took myself in Mrs. Kowalski's room under the north-facing window. The acceptance letter arrived on a Tuesday. I brought it home and set it on the kitchen table where my father reviewed project files every evening. He picked it up. He read it completely. He set it back down and looked at me across the table the way he looked at structural calculations that didn't resolve correctly. He told me Kansas City Art Institute was a fine school for people who wanted that path. He told me I was too smart to limit myself to a craft. That word craft, he said it gently, which was almost worse. He told me that Arizona State had an excellent engineering program and that with my math scores I could have options. He told me that Ryan's firm was growing and that there would be a place for me if I wanted to eventually join the business. I told him I wanted to make pottery. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he told me he wouldn't fund an arts degree. Not out of anger. He was very clear about that. He said it practically, the way he would explain why you don't use a certain material below a certain load threshold. He said it wasn't a sound investment. He said the ceramics market was a hobby market, that I could always pursue it on the side, evenings and weekends, and still have a stable foundation. I told him the foundation was the pottery. He looked at me then with something I can only describe as genuine incomprehension, like I had presented him with a calculation that defied mathematics. He picked up the coffee mug in front of him. It was a handmade piece, actually, something my mother had bought at a craft fair years before she passed. He turned it over in his hands, looking at the bottom, at the maker's mark, the way someone examines a curiosity. He set it down. He told me that anyone with a decent eye and a few months of practice could make a mug, that the market didn't reward craft, it rewarded scale. He told me I was talented, but talent wasn't a business model. Then he got up, took his project files, and went to his study. I went upstairs. I sat on my bedroom floor for a long time. Then I called my Aunt Vera. My Aunt Vera was my mother's younger sister. She was an occupational therapist in Tucson, and she owned, at various points in her life, 3 cats, a converted school bus she drove cross-country and then sold, and an opinion about everything that she delivered with the warmth of someone who had decided long ago that honesty was a form of love. She was also the only adult in my life who had come to every single one of my ceramics shows, even the first one, sophomore year, where the pieces were honestly not very good, and the reception was held in the school gymnasium, and the punch was too sweet. She came. She brought a friend. She bought the small bowl I'd made with the uneven rim because, she said, imperfect things had more soul. She listened to me describe the kitchen table conversation in its entirety. When I finished, she said, "Nora, are you asking me what you should do? Or are you asking me to tell you that what you already know you're going to do is okay?" I told her it was probably the second one. She said, "Then go, and don't look back until you've built something worth looking back from." I enrolled at KCAI that fall. My father did not come to the send-off. Ryan drove me to the airport and hugged me at the curb and said quietly that he hoped I knew what I was doing. I told him I didn't, but that felt like the right kind of not knowing. Kansas City in September is golden and loud and completely indifferent to your personal mythology. I found disbracing. My student apartment was a converted storage space above a print shop on 39th Street, and the radiator made a sound at 3 a.m. like someone dragging furniture across a hardwood floor, which I came to find oddly comforting. I was paying my own way through a combination of merit aid, a work-study position in the ceramic studio, and a part-time job at a coffee shop 2 blocks from campus where the owner, a woman named Helen, let me keep weird hours in exchange for reliability. I talked to Aunt Vera twice a week. She asked about the work, specifically, always the work. What was I firing this week? What glaze tests failed? What I was reading about. She treated my ceramics education with the same seriousness that my father reserved for structural load calculations, and that precision of attention meant everything. She also, I learned years later, had been doing something else. My second year at KCAI started developing what would eventually become my actual body of work. I was fixated on functional ceramics that didn't apologize for being functional. Bowls that wanted to hold soup. Plates that understood they would be stacked and handled and eventually chipped. Forms that held the memory of the hands that shaped them without being precious about it. I was working in a local clay body. I mixed myself, firing in reduction at cone 10, developing glazes that I tested compulsively, filling notebooks with results, adjusting variables one at a time with the methodical documentation of someone who had, I would realize later, inherited her father's engineering mind and simply applied it sideways. I graduated 3 years later with honors, and a thesis showed that the department chair called some of the most resolved functional work she'd seen from an undergraduate in 15 years. My Aunt Vera flew in from Tucson. She wore a yellow dress. She stood in front of my largest piece, a serving platter I'd spent 4 months perfecting, and didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "Your mother would have put things on that." I graduated. My father sent a card. It said congratulations and nothing else. But his handwriting was careful, which I chose to interpret as care. The years after graduation were not soft. I moved to Portland because the craft food scene there was hungry for exactly what I was building and because I knew no one, which felt important. Starting somewhere you're not already someone's daughter or someone's exception is its own kind of freedom. I rented a studio space in a shared building in Northeast Portland, a city block of artists and small manufacturers in an industrial building that smelled of sawdust and linseed oil. I paid $550 a month for 380 square feet, a gas kiln I shared with two other ceramicists, and access to a loading dock that I used every Sunday to haul work to the Portland Saturday market. The first Saturday I sold $94 worth of mugs. I almost cried in my car on the way home, and I wasn't sure if it was from relief or exhaustion or the specific vulnerability of having made something by hand and then watched a stranger turn it over, consider it, and decide it was worth a portion of their paycheck. I did not call my father about the $94. I built it slowly, the way you build anything that's meant to hold. By year 2, I had a small wholesale account with a restaurant in the Pearl District that ordered a new set of service pieces every season. By year 3, I had a 6-month waitlist for custom commissions and a feature in a regional food and design magazine that called my work the kind of object that changes how a meal feels. Helen from the coffee shop in Kansas City mailed me the article with a note that said, "Told you." I kept my head down. I gave interviews about process. I redirected personal questions back to the clay. This was not strategy. It was simply that the work was more interesting than my biography, and I have always believed that when the object is good enough, it speaks without an introduction. My father knew eventually. Ryan told me that he'd seen the magazine piece, that my father had looked at it carefully and then said it was a good little business. Ryan said this in a tone that suggested he found it somewhat inadequate as a response, which I appreciated. I thanked him and went back to work. Aunt Vera got sick 2 springs ago. Ovarian cancer caught late, the way these things tend to go in women who spend their lives taking care of other people and forget to stay still long enough to be taken care of themselves. She did 4 months of treatment in Tucson. I flew down 3 times. She was funny about it in the way she was funny about everything, which is to say directly and without performance. She told me she'd lived a full life and meant it without cliché. She told me she was proud of me. She told me she'd been putting something aside for me for years and that I'd find out about it when the time was right. She passed on a Thursday morning in April. I was in Portland. I had 3 orders due and the kiln load in progress. She would have told me to finish the firing. I finished the firing. The voicemail sat on my phone for 6 months. I couldn't. You understand. Some things you're not ready to hear until you are. I listened to it on a Sunday morning in October, sitting on the floor of my studio with a cup of coffee going cold next to me. Her voice was quieter than I remembered, or maybe that was the recording. She said, "Nora, it's me. I know you're probably firing something right now, so I'll keep it short. There's an account. Riverview Credit Union in Tucson, account ending in 4419. The password is the name of the cat. You know which one." She paused. "I've been putting things in there since you were 18. Don't spend it on rent. Spend it on something that makes the work bigger. I love you. Make something good." I sat on the floor of my studio for an hour. The cat's name was Ptolemy. She'd had him for 11 years. I would have known that name in my sleep. I called Riverview Credit Union that Monday. Account ending in 4419. Ptolemy. The account representative asked me to hold while she pulled up the balance. I looked out my studio window at the loading dock while I waited. There was $22,000 in that account. She'd been depositing $200 a month, sometimes more, for 13 years. She never mentioned it. Not once. Not in any of our twice-weekly calls. Not when I was struggling with rent. Not when I called her crying about a kiln failure at 11 p.m. I drove to Tucson and visited her grave before I touched a dollar of it. I treated it as what it was, an investment that had already decided what it wanted to be. I used it to upgrade my kiln situation from shared to owned. I used electric kiln I found through a Portland ceramics collective that was upgrading their equipment. I used the remainder to build out a proper glaze lab with accurate scales and a spray booth and the ventilation I'd been patching around for 2 years. I hired my first studio assistant, a young man named Joel, who had just finished a year abroad studying wood firing in Japan and needed somewhere to land. I paid him a real wage. He showed up every day like someone who understood that the work was the point. 18 months ago, a woman named Stephanie Marsh walked into a restaurant in the Pearl District and used one of my bowls to eat a roasted carrot dish and then asked the chef where she could find the ceramicist. Stephanie was the purchasing director for a boutique hotel group called Ember Collective. Ember ran 9 properties up and down the Pacific coast, the kind of places that understand that the object on the table is part of the story the meal is telling. Stephanie tracked me down through the restaurant. She came to my studio on a Tuesday afternoon in March, walked the space quietly, picked up pieces and turned them over and set them down without saying much. Then she sat across from me at my work table and said that Ember Collective had been searching for 2 years for a ceramicist who could supply custom tableware across all 9 properties, that they wanted something with provenance and a face and a story, and that they believed the piece was me. The offer was significant. A 3-year exclusive wholesale contract for tableware across all 9 Ember properties. The number she put on the table was $640,000. I asked for a week to review with my attorney. She said take 10 days. She bought 2 bowls on her way out. That evening, I was at my workbench drafting questions when my phone rang. Arizona area code. My father. My father does not call without a specific reason. He is not a casual phone caller. He opens calls the way he opens project meetings, with the purpose stated in the first sentence. He told me he'd heard about the Ember Collective offer. I did not ask how. The craft and hospitality networks in the West overlap in ways that consistently surprise me. He said he was calling because he had a proposal. He'd been thinking, he said, about the direction of the family business. Ryan's firm had grown considerably, but there was a service gap. High-end residential clients were asking about custom interior elements, crafted pieces, artisan details that distinguished a premium build from a standard one. He saw an opportunity to create a subsidiary, a design and craft division, that would connect clients with artisans whose work could be specified into residential and commercial projects. He wanted to anchor that subsidiary with my ceramics operation. He would provide the client network, the business infrastructure, the Weston name. In exchange, he proposed that the new entity hold a 45% stake in my studio's revenue and that I relocate production to the Phoenix area to be closer to the firm's primary market. He said it made structural sense. He used that phrase twice. He said the timing was right. He said family businesses function best as unified operations. I listened to the entire proposal without speaking. I thanked him for calling. Then I asked him if I could have a few days. He said of course. He said he hoped I could see the logic. I drove the next morning to Sauvie Island, which is a quiet flat stretch of land at the confluence of the Willamette and Columbia rivers, 20 minutes from Portland. I go there sometimes when I need to think in a place that smells like mud and water instead of clay and glaze. I sat on the hood of my car in the gray early morning and watched the light come up over the water. I thought about $22,000 deposited 200 at a time over 13 years. I thought about a voicemail I wasn't ready to hear for 6 months. I thought about a yellow dress at a graduation show. I thought about $94 on a Saturday morning and the specific feeling of a stranger choosing to take home something I'd made. I thought about my father turning over that handmade coffee mug at the kitchen table and saying anyone could make this. I drove back to Portland. I called my attorney. I signed the Ember contract. I called my father that afternoon. He picked up quickly, which told me he'd been expecting the call. I told him I was declining the proposal. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he was surprised. He said he thought the structure made sense. I told him I understood why he thought that. I told him I understood that he had built something real and significant, and that he had always believed he was offering me stability, not constraint. I told him I didn't think he was wrong about the opportunity the way he saw it. I told him we simply didn't see the same opportunity. Then I told him the truth. I told him that 14 years ago I sat at a kitchen table and showed him an acceptance letter, and he told me the ceramics market was a hobby market. I told him I understood why he believed that. I told him the market he was imagining when he said that was not the market I was building. They were different things. A hobby market is where people buy because something is cute. What I had built was where people bought because something was true. I told him I was not angry. I want to be clear about that because I think he needed to hear it. The anger had composted into something more useful a long time ago. I told him I had a contract with a hospitality group for $640,000 because I had spent 14 years making things that held. Not because of the Weston name, not because of a distribution network. Because the work was right and I had been patient enough to let it get there. I told him I wasn't interested in a 45% stake or a relocation to Phoenix. I had a studio. I had a kiln. I had Joel, who arrived every morning before I did. I had a wait list and a contract, and Aunt Vera's $22,000 living in the walls and the shelves and the glaze lab of the thing I had built. There was a silence on the line that lasted long enough that I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Then my father said quietly, "Vera always said you were the one who would surprise me." I said, "She was usually right about things." He said, "She was." And then, which I did not expect, he said, "The Ember work. Will people see your name on it?" I told him yes. "Each piece would carry my maker's mark." He said, "Good." And then, the mark matters. I didn't know what to do with that, coming from him, so I just said I knew. Because I did. I said goodbye. I was not cold. I was not warm in a way that wasn't honest. I was just finished with that particular conversation, and finished in a way that didn't leave a door swinging. The Ember Collective rollout began 6 weeks after I signed. 3 properties first, then the full 9 by the end of the quarter. Joel and I built a production schedule that we revised 3 times before it worked. I brought on 2 additional studio assistants, both women recently out of craft programs who needed a place where the work was taken seriously. I paid them properly. They showed up. Stephanie sent me a photo from the first Ember property that went live, a coastal lodge in Cannon Beach, Oregon. One of my serving bowls, matte white with an iron wash that breaks to rust at the rim, holding a pile of Pacific oysters on a driftwood table. I printed that photo and put it on the inside of my kiln room door next to the review that said, "Quiet confidence of something that has survived." On my workbench between my glazed notebooks and my firing log, there is a small ceramic piece I made in my first year at KCAI. It's not technically accomplished. The walls are uneven, and the foot ring is thick, and one side dips lower than the other. I keep it because it's the first piece I made that felt like mine, fully mine, made from a material I understood and a process I was beginning to trust. It survived every move. Kansas City to Portland. Studio to studio. It sat on a shelf through the lean years and the better years, and through the 6 months I couldn't listen to a voicemail. Aunt Vera never saw the Ember contract. She knew it was coming the way she seemed to know most things about me slightly before I knew them myself. She funded my glaze lab and called it an investment, and she was right. What she understood, and what took me longer to understand, is that the work doesn't get easier. It gets clearer. You stop asking whether you're allowed to do it and start asking whether you're doing it well. The first question has 100 voices attached to it, most of them well-meaning, some of them afraid, a few of them genuinely certain they know what's best for you. The second question has only one voice. It's quieter. It's the one worth listening to. My father thought the mark didn't matter once. Now he asks if people will see it. The mark always mattered. It still does. If you are doing something real, something that you built from the raw material of your own conviction and the patience of someone willing to fail in private before succeeding in public, I want to say this simply. The people who couldn't see it when you started are not the measure of it. The work is the measure. Keep the work honest. Keep the fire going. The kiln doesn't care who believed in you. It only cares what you put inside it. I've thought a lot about what my father said at the end of that phone call. Not the proposal, not the 45%, not the part about structural sense. The last part. The mark matters. That's the thing that stayed with me, because for most of my life, he was the one telling me it didn't. I don't say that with bitterness. I've had enough time with this story to know the difference between bitterness and clarity, and what I feel now is mostly the second one. My father believed what he believed about craft and markets and viable futures because he had built something real from those beliefs. You can't dismiss that. He watched a family feed itself and grow for 30 years on precision and scale and measurable outcomes. Of course, he looked at a bull and saw a commodity. He was looking through the lens of everything that had worked for him. That's not cruelty. That's just the limit of a particular kind of vision. What I understand now is that his dismissal was the making of me, and not in the inspirational poster sense of that phrase. I mean it mechanically. Because he wouldn't fund the degree, I funded it myself, which meant I couldn't afford to fail casually. Because he called pottery a hobby market, I spent 14 years proving to myself, not to him, to myself, that I was building something different. The pressure of not being believed in is either crushing or clarifying. For me, it was clarifying, but I think that was partly Aunt Vera's doing. Vera did something specific that I only fully understood after she was gone. She never argued with my father on my behalf. She never tried to change his mind or broker a peace or explain to him why he was wrong about craft. She just quietly, month by month, for 13 years, put $200 into an account and named it with a cat's name and waited for me to be ready to find it. That's a particular kind of intelligence. It doesn't waste energy on battles that aren't winnable. It invests in the thing that is. There's a cause and effect in the story that took me years to trace. My father's certainty pushed me out. Vera's faith caught me. The distance from home gave me the freedom to fail without an audience. The failures built the work built the reputation built the contract. Every link in that chain is connected to the ones before it, and if you pull any one of them, if my father had simply agreed, if Vera hadn't saved, if I'd stayed in Arizona and gone to ASU and taken the safe path, the whole sequence collapses. I used to think I succeeded despite what my father did. I don't think that anymore. I think I succeeded inside a set of conditions that included his refusal, and that refusing to waste time resenting those conditions was one of the most important decisions I ever made without knowing I was making it. Joel shows up before me every morning. He does this because he believes in the work, and because I pay him fairly, and because I built a place where someone who cares about craft can come and be taken seriously. That's not an accident. That's what happens when the person running the operation has spent 14 years learning that the way you treat the work is the way you treat the people doing it. The kiln doesn't care about your biography. It cares whether you loaded it correctly, whether the temperature curve is right, whether you've done the work to give the clay what it needs to become what it's trying to be. I find that clarifying. The outcome is honest. There's no arguing with it. My aunt knew that. She funded a glaze lab, not a lifestyle. She invested in the infrastructure of the work because she understood that the work was the thing. If you are somewhere in the middle of your own version of this, the part where no one believes you yet, where the numbers are small and the hours are long and the person whose opinion once mattered most to you thinks you're making a mistake, I want you to hear this from someone who was exactly there. The believing comes from the building, not the other way around. Build the thing. Build it like it matters. It does.